The night my husband left for his 3-day business trip, I kissed him goodbye at the door like I always did. I watched his car disappear down the quiet street, believing everything in my life was normal. But 2 hours later, his laptop on the kitchen counter lit up. A notification appeared on the screen, a message he never meant for me to see. And in that moment, I realized my husband didn't just forget his laptop. He forgot he was still logged in. And what I discovered that night was a secret that would completely destroy the life I thought we had. Before I begin telling you what really happened, a story about secrets, lies, and the moment everything in my marriage shattered, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoy real emotional stories like this, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It truly helps these stories reach more people. And while you listen, tell me in the comments, what city or country are you listening from today? I always read the comments, and it honestly amazes me to see how people from all around the world connect through these stories. Now, let me tell you about the night my husband left for a business trip and accidentally left the truth behind. The first thing you need to understand about my husband, Cassian Vale, is that he was the kind of man everyone trusted. Tall, calm, soft-spoken, the type of guy who shook hands firmly and remembered people's birthdays. When strangers met him, they usually said something like, "Your husband seems like a really solid guy." And for 7 years, I believed that too. My name is Ilara Quinn, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had a pretty normal life. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Stonebrook Heights, a place where every house had trimmed lawns and neighbors waved when they drove by. Cassian worked as a regional operations consultant for a logistics company, which basically meant one thing: he traveled. A lot. At first, those trips didn't bother me. They were usually 2 or 3 days long, sometimes a week. But he always called, always texted, always came back with some little souvenir from whatever city he'd visited. Coffee beans from Seattle, a magnet from Denver, a scarf from Chicago once. Little things that made the distance feel temporary. And I never questioned any of it. Until the night everything changed. It was a Thursday evening in early October. The air had that cool autumn smell, the kind that makes you want to open windows and light candles. Cassian was packing his suitcase upstairs. I was in the kitchen making pasta. "Flight's at 9 a.m. tomorrow," he called down. "Chicago again?" he replied. "Big client meeting." I remember rolling my eyes playfully. "You should just rent an apartment there at this point." He laughed. "Don't tempt me." At the time, it felt like a normal conversation. Comfortable, familiar. The kind couples have when they've been together long enough to move around each other without thinking. After dinner, we sat on the couch watching some crime show neither of us was really paying attention to. Around 10:30, Cassian stood up. "I should get some sleep. Early flight." I nodded. "Don't forget your laptop this time." He grinned. "That happened 1 time. 2. Okay, twice." He leaned down and kissed my forehead. "I'll call you when I land." "Safe travels," I said. Then he went upstairs. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the garage door opening. Cassian always left early for flights. I heard his footsteps in the kitchen, the clink of keys, then the front door closing. And just like that, he was gone. I rolled over and fell back asleep. The day was quiet. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, so most of my mornings were spent at the kitchen table with my tablet and coffee. By evening, I had forgotten Cassian had even left. That's how normal it all felt. Around 7 p.m., I went to make tea. That's when I noticed something sitting on the counter. His laptop, closed, right next to the fruit bowl. I sighed. Seriously, Cassian? He'd forgotten it again. I picked it up, planning to put it in his office, but when I opened the lid, the screen lit up. And that's when the notification appeared. A message from someone named M. The preview text read, "Did she suspect anything this time?" My heart did something strange. Not quite panic, not quite fear, just confusion. I stared at the message for a long time. Then another one appeared. "You promised you'd tell her soon." My stomach tightened. Tell her what? My first instinct was simple. Close the laptop, pretend I never saw it. But something stopped me. Something quiet. Something instinctive. Instead, I clicked the message, and the entire conversation opened. At first, it didn't make sense. The messages stretched back months, maybe longer. Most of them were short, careful, almost coded. Trip confirmed. Weekend works. Still waiting. But the deeper I scrolled, the more my chest began to tighten. Because the person on the other side of the conversation wasn't just a friend. They weren't just a coworker. They were someone who knew intimate details about my husband's life, about our life. One message read, "Does she still believe the Chicago story?" Another, "You can't keep lying to her forever." And Cassian's reply, the reply that made my hands start shaking, said, "Just a little longer." My first thought was obvious, affair. Every cliché alarm bell in my brain started ringing, but something about the messages didn't feel like typical cheating. They were too controlled, too careful, like two people planning something bigger than just sneaking around. I kept scrolling. Then I saw the message that made my blood run cold. It was sent 2 weeks ago, from Cassian. Once everything is finalized, she'll never know. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. What exactly was he planning? And who was M? I clicked the profile, but there was no photo, just a number and a name. Marcellus. I had never heard that name before, not once in 7 years, which meant one of two things. Either Cassian had a secret friend or a secret life. And the worst part, the messages kept going, further back, until I reached one sent almost a year ago, the very first message in the thread. It was from Marcellus, and it said, "You sure she's the right one to marry?" I sat down slowly in the kitchen chair. My mind was spinning, because Cassian and I had been married for 7 years, which meant this conversation, this secret, had started after our wedding. But what truly terrified me was Cassian's reply. "She's the safest option." In that moment, something inside my chest cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like glass breaking somewhere deep inside you. Because suddenly, I wasn't just reading messages anymore. I was staring at the possibility that the man I had loved for nearly a decade might have married me for reasons I didn't understand. And whatever those reasons were, he was still hiding them. And if I wanted to understand the truth, I needed to keep reading, because buried somewhere inside that laptop was the real reason my husband married me. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the kitchen table, watching the laptop, waiting for another message to appear. And around midnight, it did. From Marcellus. 3 simple words. Phase 2 begins. And Cassian's reply came just 30 seconds later, from somewhere in the sky, probably halfway to Chicago. She has no idea. And that's when I realized something terrifying. My husband hadn't just been lying to me. He had been planning something that involved me, something I wasn't supposed to know about. And if I wanted to understand the truth, I needed to keep reading, because buried somewhere inside that laptop was the real reason my husband married me. I didn't close the laptop that night. I couldn't. Because once you see the first crack in something you thought was perfect, you start needing to see how deep the damage goes. So instead of shutting the screen and pretending none of this existed, I kept scrolling. The kitchen was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. Outside, the neighborhood was asleep. Inside, my entire marriage was starting to look like a lie. The message thread between Cassian and Marcellus went back almost 11 months. At first, the messages were cautious, short, almost professional. But the more I read, the more something disturbing began to form in my mind. Because their conversations weren't just about meeting up. They were about timing, about documents, about waiting for something to be finalized. One message from Cassian said, "Once everything transfers, she won't question anything." Another from Marcellus read, "You're cutting it close. If she finds out early, the whole plan collapses." My fingers went cold on the trackpad. What plan? Then I saw a message from 3 months earlier, and this one felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. Marcellus wrote, "Did the house paperwork go through?" Cassian replied, "Almost, just waiting for the last signature." The house. My eyes moved slowly around our kitchen. The white cabinets, the dining table Cassian had insisted we buy, the framed wedding photo hanging near the hallway. This house. Our house. What paperwork? I opened a new tab and checked the laptop's folders. Cassian had always been extremely organized with his files. Work folders, travel itineraries, expense reports. But then I saw something strange. A folder simply labeled Archive. The date on it was recent, just 2 weeks ago. My pulse started racing. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of scanned documents, contracts, financial statements, property records. At first, they looked like normal business files, until one file name caught my eye. transfer_agreement_final.pdf. Something about the name felt wrong. I opened it, and the moment the document loaded on the screen, the air left my lungs. Because at the top of the page was an address, our home. But the names listed on the document were not what I expected. The primary owner listed wasn't me. It wasn't even Cassian. It was someone named Marcellus Thorne. My chest tightened. Why would a stranger's name be connected to my house? I scrolled further down, and then I saw Cassian's name, listed under cosigner/financial facilitator. But my name was there too, not as an owner, not even as a partner. My name was listed under something called contingent beneficiary clause. I didn't even understand that meant. But the more I read, the worse it got. Because according to the document, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This didn't make sense. None of it did. Why would Cassian structure the ownership of our house like this? Why would a stranger have any legal claim to it? Unless Cassian was planning something that involved losing the house, or worse, something happening to him. My mind immediately went somewhere darker. Insurance, fraud, debt, something illegal, because no normal reason existed for hiding this kind of paperwork from your spouse. Then another notification appeared, another message from Marcellus. You need to double-check the insurance timeline. My stomach dropped. Insurance? I opened the chat window again. Cassian had just replied. Relax, she signed everything already. My hands began to shake. Signed what? I started digging through the documents again, scrolling through file after file. Then I found another one, life_policy_update.pdf. The document opened, and I instantly recognized the signature at the bottom. Mine. But I had never seen this document before. The date said it had been signed 4 months ago. I tried to remember what happened 4 months ago. Then it hit me. That was the weekend Cassian asked me to sign some routine banking paperwork. He said it was just an update for our mortgage. I remembered signing quickly while standing in the kitchen, barely reading anything, trusting him, like an idiot. But this wasn't a mortgage update. It was a life insurance policy adjustment, and the beneficiary wasn't me. It was Marcellus Thorne. My vision blurred. Why would my husband put another man as the beneficiary of his life insurance? Unless Marcellus wasn't just a business partner, unless he was something else, something more important than me. Then I noticed something at the bottom of the document, a relationship label. Beneficiary relationship, brother. Brother? Cassian had a brother? That was impossible. In 7 years of marriage, Cassian had told me he was an only child. He said his parents died when he was young. He said he had no siblings, no extended family. That had always made me feel sorry for him, but now I was staring at proof that he'd been lying about that too. The clock on the wall read 1:43 a.m. I felt like I was slowly putting together pieces of a puzzle that was far bigger than I understood. Cassian had a secret brother, a hidden property agreement, a life insurance policy that didn't benefit his wife, and months of secret messages planning something behind my back. But the most disturbing message in the entire conversation appeared when I scrolled further down. It was sent just last week. Marcellus wrote, "Are you sure she won't fight you in court?" Cassian replied, "She won't. She trusts me too much." That sentence hurt more than anything else. Not the paperwork, not the lies, not even the secret brother, just that simple sentence. Because he was right. I did trust him, completely, and he used that trust like a weapon. I leaned forward again, reading the next message. Marcellus said, "Once the divorce is filed, the property transfer becomes automatic." Divorce? My heart skipped. Cassian replied, "Exactly. She'll think she's getting the house." I felt my breath stop. But by the time the legal process finishes, another message appeared from Cassian. "Everything will already belong to us." The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This entire plan, this entire secret operation, was about taking the house from me. The house I had paid half the mortgage on. The house I had renovated. The house I believed was our future. Cassian and his secret brother had been planning to steal it. But then I saw the final message from Marcellus, the message that made this entire situation far more dangerous. He wrote, "Just make sure she never discovers the other account." And Cassian replied, "Relax, she doesn't even know it exists." The other account, another secret, another layer of lies. And suddenly I realized something. Cassian had no idea that I was sitting here, reading everything, seeing the entire plan unfold in front of me, which meant I had an advantage. For the first time in hours, I wasn't just scared. I was thinking, planning, because if Cassian believed he was the only one capable of keeping secrets, he was about to learn something very important. He wasn't the only one who could play that game. I didn't confront Cassian the next morning. That was the first thing I decided. Because the moment you confront someone who has been lying for months, you give them a chance to lie again. And I wasn't going to give him that chance. Not this time. The next morning, the house felt different. Not physically. Everything looked the same. The gray couch, the framed photos, the quiet suburban street outside the kitchen window. But emotionally, it felt like I was standing inside a stage set, a fake life, a carefully built illusion that Cassian had been maintaining for years. And now that I had seen behind the curtain, I couldn't unsee it. Cassian texted me around 9:30 a.m. Landed. Meetings all day. Call you tonight. I stared at the message. For 7 years, those words would have meant nothing. Now they sounded like a script. So I replied simply, "Good luck today." Then I placed the phone on the table, because today wasn't about reacting. Today was about preparing. The first place I went was the county property office. I didn't even know why at first. Instinct, maybe? But the woman behind the desk was surprisingly helpful. Her name was Sandra, and after I explained that I needed to verify property ownership records, she pulled up our address. She clicked through a few files. Then she frowned slightly. "That's odd," she said. "What is?" I asked carefully. She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, the official record of my home, except the ownership structure wasn't what I thought it was. According to the county registry, the house was not owned by Cassian and me as a married couple. It was owned by a limited liability company. The name of that company was Northbridge Holdings, LLC, and the listed partners were two people, Cassian Vale and Marcellus Thorne. I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest. This wasn't just a lie. This was a setup. Cassian had never intended for the house to belong to us. It had always been part of whatever scheme he and his brother were running, and I had been unknowingly paying into it for 7 years. But the worst part came when Sandra clicked one more document, the formation papers for the company, and the date listed on the document made my stomach twist. The company had been created 2 weeks before our wedding. 2 weeks! That meant Cassian had been planning this before he even married me. I drove home in complete silence. The steering wheel felt heavy in my hands. 7 years. 7 years of memories, trips, birthdays, holidays. Every one of them suddenly felt like scenes from a movie where I was the only person who didn't know the ending. When I got home, I opened Cassian's laptop again. But this time, I wasn't just reading. I was collecting evidence. Screenshots of conversations, copies of documents, photos of the insurance policy. Everything. If Cassian thought he could quietly steal the house from me during a divorce, he had clearly underestimated something. I might have trusted him, but I wasn't stupid. Then I noticed something in one of the message threads, a travel email confirmation, not for Chicago, for Austin, Texas. The reservation was for a small hotel downtown. The date? Tonight. So Cassian wasn't in Chicago. He had never been going to Chicago. He was meeting Marcellus. And suddenly, an idea formed in my mind, a risky one, but a perfect one. Because if Cassian believed I still knew nothing, then he would never see what was coming. That evening, Cassian called me. His voice sounded calm, relaxed. "How was your day?" I said. "Quiet." "Miss you already." I almost laughed. Instead, I said softly, "When do you come back?" "Sunday." 3 days. 3 days he thought he had to finalize his plan. "Travel safe," I told him. "I always do," he replied. 2 days later, Cassian came home, just like he always did, dragging his suitcase through the front door, looking tired, smiling when he saw me. "Hey," he said warmly, "I missed you." I stood in the kitchen watching him. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man I married, but now I knew better. "Did the meetings go well?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, loosening his tie. "Productive trip." Chicago, Austin, whatever lie he was using this time. I simply nodded. I'm glad. Then I slid an envelope across the kitchen table. Cassian frowned slightly. What's this? I said. Open it. He did, and this time his face drained of color, because inside that envelope were legal papers. He sat down and opened the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots, the messages with Marcellus, the insurance policy, the property documents, the company registration. Everything. I watched his face carefully. At first he looked confused, then pale, then completely still. Where did you get these? He asked quietly. Your laptop, I said. Silence filled the room. Cassian leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time in 7 years, my husband looked genuinely afraid. You weren't supposed to see that, he said. I laughed once, a short, bitter sound. That's the part that bothers you? He ran his hand through his hair. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. You and your secret brother created a company before we even got married. You put my house into it. You changed your insurance policy to benefit him, and you planned to divorce me once the paperwork was finalized. Cassian stared at me, but he didn't deny it. Listen, he said carefully. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly. No. You can't fix something that was planned before the marriage even started. He exhaled heavily. You were never supposed to get hurt. That sentence almost made me laugh again. Then I slid another envelope across the table. What's this? He asked. Open it. He did, and this time his face completely drained of color, because inside that envelope were legal papers, divorce papers, filed that morning. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached behind them was a lawsuit notice against Northbridge Holdings, LLC, against Cassian Vale, and against Marcellus Thorne. You reported us? He said in disbelief. I shook my head. No. I hired a lawyer, and after reviewing all the documents, I leaned forward slightly. They realized something you didn't. Cassian's eyes narrowed. What? Because when you had me sign that insurance document, I said calmly, you forged my consent on 3 other legal documents. His face went completely still, and that's when I knew. He hadn't realized it. Forgery, fraud, financial deception. Everything he had done to steal the house was now evidence in a criminal case. Cassian stood up suddenly. You set me up. I looked at him calmly. No, you set yourself up. He stared at me for a long moment, then finally said quietly, You're not the woman I thought you were. I met his eyes, and you're not the man I married. 2 months later, the investigation was still ongoing. Northbridge Holdings was frozen, the property transfer was canceled, and Cassian and Marcellus were facing multiple fraud charges. As for the house, legally it now belonged entirely to me. Ironically, the one thing Cassian had spent years trying to steal was the one thing he ended up losing. But the real victory wasn't the house. It was something else, something quieter. Peace. Because for the first time in years, I was finally living a life that wasn't built on lies. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position and you discovered the person you trusted most in the world had been secretly planning against you for years, what would you have done? Would you have confronted them immediately? Or would you have stayed silent and waited for the right moment to expose the truth? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.